All right, three abstract descriptions of three positions that are possible here and three positions that have been historically dominant. To make this a little bit less abstract, I want to add some graphics that I find useful when I think about this set of issues here. And so for that I'm going to use red. The way I think of dualism is as follows. Here we have the physical. And to capture this more significance, more essential part of human nature, and then the less importance of the physical here, above the physical, I will put the psychological. So we have the physical and we have the psychological, but these are two different kinds of things, two different kinds of stuffs, each with its own nature, with its own goals, each with its own natures and destinies. So I'll put a solid line here to indicate a radical or hard distinction between the physical side of our nature, the lower side, and the higher psychological side of our nature. So use that as a graphic for dualism. For reductive materialism, the kind of graphic I think is useful is to think of ourselves as a body, right, as a physical system, and as dominantly, right, as a physical system. And so all of the explanations and focus that we give to ourselves as human beings is to focus on the physicality of our being. That's the only fundamental reality here. Now it's true that these psychological things do exist. They're not simply illusions here. They are a part of the world, but they're not really doing very much. They are merely epiphenomena. They're just a useless byproduct, so to speak, of the underlying physical process. So I'll just put them up here. And they are just little emanations, right, that come out, but really all the action is here in the physical side. Now, as a graphic for the integrationist approach, if we have two equally important, necessarily interdependent aspects of one unified being, then the way I characterize this graphically is to say we are, right, a physical being, but equally so, we are a psychological being, and the relationship between these two is interdependent. Physical things can cause psychological things, and then in turn, psychological properties can influence and cause physical states, and so the human being is seen as an integrated, interdependent being of this sort here. Another way to think about this is in terms of tags that sometimes are helpful here. So one way of thinking about dualism, for example, and don't put too much weight on these tags. They don't capture all of the versions of dualism or all of the versions of reductive materialism or integrationism, but they're useful aids to the memory, so to speak. One way of thinking about dualism is to think of ourselves, the human being is a ghost in a machine. Right, the idea here being that the machine part being our bodily nature, which can be understood totally in mechanical terms, separated from the soul. All it is a mechanical system. But our psychological side is a ghost, and a ghost is traditionally understood as a disembodied soul or a disembodied spirit that hasn't gone on to heaven or been reincarnated yet. And so it's a non-material entity, and in this case here, the human being simply is a body that's a mechanical system and a spirit that happen to be cohabiting for a certain amount of time. The way best to think of reductive materialism in terms of a tag here is to use the following analogy, to say something like the following, that, again, this is not original to me, but mind is to matter what smoke is to fire. If we think of fire, right, fire is a complicated physical system. You have some underlying physical products, wood, right, or whatever, that's undergoing a chemical transformation, right, that we call combustion, and all of the heat, all of the energy, all of the light is embodied there. But then we have this smoke that kind of is a byproduct here, but the smoke really doesn't do anything. It's not causing the fire, it's not shedding any light on the scenario, it's not generating any heat, really, so to speak. It's just along for the ride. It's a useless byproduct. And so the same thing holds then for the human being. What's going on is various complicated things in our material system. The mental or the psychological is like the smoke. It's a useless byproduct here. Verbal tag, I think, was useful for integrationism. Many integrationists are fond of modern developments in artificial intelligence, fond of making development or analogies to computing systems. And so, again, not necessarily putting a great deal of weight on this analogy here, but one that helps to capture the flavor of integrationism in contrast to the other two, is to say something like the following: that mind is to body what software is to hardware. The idea here being that if you're going to have a computing system that's functional, an actual functioning computer system with all of its capacities, doing the kinds of things that it's doing, it's not just hardware. Hardware left to its own devices is not going to do anything. It's not just software. Instead, it's an integration of software. Software being the actual running of a program on the physical system that is the computer hardware. And so you can't separate hardware from software and have any sort of functioning computing going on. Instead, what we call computing, right, having a living computing system, right, so to speak, is the actual running of software on an actual machine, and it's the integrated byproduct or byplay and interplay between the two of them, where the hardware is sending signals to the software, right, and vice versa, and that's what we call a computing system. All right, and then by analogy, the psychological, certainly if we think about thoughts, right, many of our thoughts are programs. We do addition, we've learned various routines for adding numbers or multiplying numbers. What we're doing is using our brains according to certain abstract instructional patterns, and it's what we call thinking, right, can then be thought of, at least analogically, in terms of the software that is our thinking running on our hardware, which is our brain. Okay, I'll pause there for a moment.